He took the envelope from my kitchen counter like it was his, slid it under his jacket, and walked out the door without even looking back. I can still hear the slam of his car door, the roar of his engine, and the sound of my own heart thudding as I stood frozen in my own house, realizing that in one careless moment, my brother had vanished with everything we had left. It wasn't just money. It was months of savings my husband and I had put aside to finally fix the roof before winter, to buy new shoes for our son, to cover the bills that kept piling up on the edge of my desk. I knew he was reckless. Always. Chasing shortcuts. But I never thought he'd turn his greed on us. That night I sat at the table, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee gone cold, replaying every sign I had ignored. The way he dodged calls from creditors, the sudden interest in how much we had in our account, the fake smile he wore at family dinners as if he was performing for a role. My husband's silence weighed on me. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just pressed his lips together and shook his head, like he had already known this betrayal was coming. For 2 days I barely slept, walking through the house like a ghost, my son watching me with wide, questioning eyes. He was only 12, but sharper than most grown men I knew, and he had noticed everything. On the third morning, he slipped into the kitchen while I was still in my robe, hands trembling around a cup I couldn't finish. He laid his phone on the table and said in a voice far too steady for his age, "Mom, I know where Uncle is, and I know how to make him pay." That's when my blood ran cold, because in that moment, I realized my son had been watching, listening, and planning, and that this story wasn't going to end the way my brother thought it would. I wanted to snap at him, to remind him he was just a child, that this wasn't his burden to carry, but when I looked at his face, I didn't see a little boy. I saw focus, anger, and something else. Something I had never seen in his eyes before. He slid the phone toward me, and on the screen was a trail of messages, receipts, and check-ins that my brother had been too careless to hide. He had been using our stolen money at bars, at gas stations, even booking cheap motels under fake names. That didn't fool anyone with half a brain. My son had pieced it all together from apps, notifications, and the digital footprints my brother never thought a 12-year-old could track. He whispered, "He thinks he's smart, but he left every door open. We can catch him." My hands shook as I scrolled through the evidence, every charge like a slap to the face. Proof that my brother didn't just take from us, he mocked us while doing it. The worst part was the timestamp. 2 nights ago, he'd been only 20 minutes away. I felt a sting of humiliation realizing my son had done what I hadn't, taken control instead of sitting in silence. I should have called the police right then, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was family loyalty, maybe it was fear of the fallout. My son broke that hesitation with one sentence. "Mom, if we let him get away with this, he'll do it. Again. Not just to us, to anyone he can." And as much as I hated to admit it, he was right. My brother had underestimated me all my life. But what he never saw coming was the quiet determination of the boy who carried both my eyes and my fire. That evening I drove us out to the edge of town, the place where the cheap motels lined. The highway like forgotten promises. My son sat in the passenger seat, his backpack on his lap, and I kept glancing at him, torn between fear and awe. He had mapped out the pattern, showing me how my brother checked in under one name, then left, suddenly to switch to another down the road. It was sloppy, predictable, the kind of arrogance that made me sick. As we pulled into the lot, I spotted his car parked crooked under a flickering streetlight. The same dented bumper, the same cracked taillight I knew too well. My chest tightened, but before I could speak, my son leaned forward, eyes sharp, and said, "Mom, we don't confront him. We collect proof." He pulled out his tablet, the camera already rolling, and whispered the plan as though he had rehearsed it in his head for days. We walked the lot slowly, careful not to draw attention, catching footage of the license plate, the car, the receipts from the trash bin that still smelled of fast food grease. Every step felt like trespassing into a darker part of my own family. History. Then, through the window of room 12, I saw him. My brother, sprawled on the bed, laughing into his phone with someone, our money spread out on the blanket like a trophy. My stomach turned, but my son's hand gripped mine tight, grounding me. "This is enough," he whispered, and for the first time since my brother stole from us, I felt something stronger than rage. I felt control. By the time we left, we had everything we needed: photos, videos, timestamps. My son's calm voice beside me as I drove back into the night was the final push I needed. Mom, tomorrow we make him face it. No more hiding. Teen teens. Next morning, I didn't wake up to silence or despair. I woke up to my son already at the table, his laptop open, papers spread out in neat piles like he had transformed our dining room into a war room. He had organized everything: receipts, screenshots, video clips, even a timeline of where my brother had been and how much he had spent of our savings. His handwriting was firm, his logic sharper than most grown men I'd met. He looked up at me with steady eyes and said, "All you have to do, Mom, is hand this over. They'll have no choice but to act." My breath caught in my throat, because it wasn't just evidence he'd gathered, it was a case. Airtight, undeniable, the kind of thing even a lawyer couldn't poke holes in. He had done what I had been too broken, too tired, too betrayed to do. And that's when I realized he wasn't asking for permission. He was demanding justice, not just for me, but for all of us. I sat down beside him, running my fingers over the stack of papers, feeling the weight of months of sacrifice in every line of ink. That money wasn't luxury, it wasn't play, it was survival. The roof above our heads, the medicine bills tucked in a drawer, the future we had been trying to carve out piece by piece. My brother hadn't just stolen from us, he had spit on every effort we had made, every late night I spent balancing bills, every moment I told my son, "Be patient, we'll get there." And now here my child was, 12 years old, showing me what strength looked like when blood had failed me. When I finally called the police, my voice didn't shake. I spoke clearly, gave them the details, and when they asked for proof, I didn't hesitate. I dropped the folder on the desk at the precinct like it was a weapon, and I saw the officer's eyebrows lift as he leafed through the evidence. "This is solid," he muttered, and for the first time in days, I let myself breathe. But the real moment came later, when they knocked on my brother's motel door. My son and I sat in the car across the lot, watching as the officers pulled him out, his hands up, his voice raised in panic. He looked smaller than I remembered, weaker somehow, his arrogance cracking under the flashing lights. He scanned the lot, desperate for an ally. And that's when his eyes found me. He shouted my name, called me a traitor, accused me of destroying family. The same words he had thrown at me all my life when I refused to give in. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't scream back. I just stared at him through the windshield, my son's hand resting on my arm, steady and unyielding. The officers cuffed him, led him away, and the sound of the car door closing on him was louder than any apology he could have ever given me. That was the end of his power. That was the moment the scales finally tipped, and yet it wasn't over. Because in the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like cracks in glass. My brother's name hit the records. Fraud, theft, pending, charges. And the people who once defended him stopped answering his calls. His charm, his manipulation, his endless excuses, none of it mattered anymore. The world was finally seeing what I had seen all along, and the weight I had carried in silence was lifted piece by piece. But the real victory wasn't his downfall, it was my son's strength. Because every time I thought about giving up, about folding into the guilt and shame that my brother had tried to pin on me, I remembered the boy who refused to stay silent, who refused to let betrayal define us. It struck me then. Maybe revenge wasn't about rage or destruction. Maybe it was about teaching someone that every action has a consequence, and sometimes the sharpest blade isn't anger, it's truth, documented, undeniable, delivered by the hands of the one they underestimated the most. And as I watched, my son sit at that same kitchen table weeks later, finally doing his homework instead of playing detective, I realized something that made my heart ache and swell at the same time. My brother had tried to break us, but instead he had forged in, my son a resilience that would outlast him. The trial was not glamorous, not like in the movies, but it was relentless in its details. I sat there in the stiff wooden chair, my son beside me with his school notebook open, pretending to doodle while his sharp eyes missed nothing. The prosecutor laid out the evidence we had gathered. Every receipt, every screenshot, every timestamp from his reckless spending. My brother sat across the room, trying to look calm, trying to smirk, but I saw the twitch in his jaw, the way his foot bounced, under the table, betraying nerves he couldn't control. When they read out the total amount he had stolen, down to the last cent, I felt the room tilt. It wasn't just numbers. It was months of our lives, shoes my son went without, bills I had put off paying, nights I had cried quietly so he wouldn't hear me. And now it was all in black and white, undeniable. My brother's lawyer tried to spin it as a family misunderstanding, calling it a loan, painting him as a man under pressure who had simply borrowed funds with the intention of paying them back. The words sounded hollow, even laughable, especially when the prosecutor showed the video of him sprawled on that motel bed, money fanned out like playing cards, laughing into his phone. I didn't need to glance at the jury to know how they saw him. Arrogant, entitled, careless. The truth was out, and no amount of excuses could shove it back into the shadows. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't tremble. I stood tall, looked directly at the judge, and spoke the way I had rehearsed in my head every night since the day he took from us. I told them how he had exploited our trust, how the money he stole was not spare change, but survival. I told them about my son, 12 years old, forced to become a detective in his own home just to make sense of an adult's betrayal. I ended with the line I had written on a scrap of paper in my purse, the one that had kept me steady through every moment of doubt. Family is not built on blood when blood is used as a weapon. Family is built on trust, and he broke it. The silence that followed was louder than applause. The sentence wasn't dramatic. Probation, restitution, restrictions that clipped his wings tighter than any cage. But I knew the real punishment wasn't the legal one. It was the humiliation, the exposure, the way people who once defended him now crossed the street to avoid his eyes. The money would be repaid, slowly, under court order, every check a reminder that he no longer controlled the narrative. He had lost the power he thought was eternal, stripped away piece by piece. But what lingered with me most was not his downfall. It was the pride in my son's face when we walked out of that courtroom. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just squeezed my hand and said, "We did it." And I realized he wasn't talking about winning a case. He was talking about surviving it, about standing up when it mattered, about showing the world that we would not be broken, not even by someone who should have loved us. That night, as we sat at the dinner table eating takeout noodles, the simplest meal felt like a feast. My son laughed again, the weight gone from his shoulders, and I found myself breathing deeper, freer, lighter. My brother had taken from us, yes, but he had also given me something he never intended. The proof that I was stronger than I knew, and that my son was already becoming the kind of man I could be proud of. The weeks after the sentencing were strangely quiet, like the air after a storm. My brother tried to reach me, of course. Voicemails filled with anger one day, begging the next, guilt trips about destroying family, claims that I had poisoned my son against him. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For once, silence was my power. Each ignored call was a line drawn in stone. We were done. No more rescues, no more second chances, no more twisting myself into knots to protect someone who had only ever seen me as a resource to drain. At first, some relatives tried to meddle. An aunt called, her voice dripping with false sweetness, urging me to forgive and forget because he's still your brother. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply said, he's not my responsibility. He made his choices. And I ended the call. Word must have spread because the calls stopped soon after. People finally understood that I wasn't going to fold this time. It was as if the moment I stopped defending myself, stopped explaining, the narrative shifted on its own. My brother was no longer the charming victim he painted himself to be. He was exposed for what he was. Meanwhile, life in my home began to heal. My son went back to being 12. Though I knew he had grown years older in wisdom, he still carried his notebook, but now it was filled with sketches and math problems instead of case files. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, a mixture of pride and relief, as if he finally believed I was unshakable. That mattered more to me than any restitution check ever could, and the checks did come. Small amounts, deducted straight from his wages under court order, dribbling in each month. Each envelope was stamped official, each sum a reminder that he was now accountable not by choice, but by law. I didn't cash them right away. I let them sit in a drawer, stacked one over the other like trophies of survival. Each one whispered, "The same truth, you don't own me anymore." What surprised me most was how light I felt. For years I had carried the weight of keeping family together, of being the one to patch the holes, to lend the money, to clean the messes. Letting that go was like shedding a second skin. I didn't realize how heavy it had been until it was gone. One night, while washing dishes, my son looked up from his homework and asked, "Mom, do you miss him?" The question startled me. I dried my hands slowly, searching for the right answer. I thought about the boy my brother had once been, the laughter we shared as kids, the promises whispered in the dark of our parents' fights. I thought about the man he became, manipulative, careless, cruel in ways he pretended were jokes. And then I said, I miss who I thought he was, but I don't miss who he really is. My son nodded, as if that made sense to him, and maybe it did. Because sometimes the hardest part of betrayal isn't losing someone. It's accepting they were never who you believed them to be. That truth, bitter as it was, became my freedom. I wasn't chained to the past anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come. I wasn't begging for scraps of decency from someone who had none to give. I was free. The final time I saw him was not in a courtroom, not at a family gathering, but by accident at the grocery store. I had gone in for milk and bread, my son waiting in the car, and there he was. Older, thinner, his eyes darting like a man who no longer trusted the world around him. He spotted me and froze, a basket in his hand with nothing but a six-pack of cheap beer inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he forced that same smile he had used all his life, the one that once fooled me into believing he was harmless. "Sis," he said, voice too bright, "we should talk." I stared at him, really stared, and realized there was nothing left between us but the wreckage of choices he had made. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even slow my steps. I walked past him without a word, the click of my shoes on the tile louder than anything he could have said. Behind me, I heard him mutter something about loyalty, about blood, but it rolled off me like dust in the wind. That night, I sat with my son on the porch as the sky turned the color of embers. He leaned against me, taller now, his shoulders broader, his presence a reminder of everything I still had. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. I thought about the money, the trial, the whispers from relatives who didn't understand. I thought about years of being the family's safety net, always, expected to catch him when he fell. And then I thought about the look in my brother's eyes at the store, hollow, desperate, stripped of power. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I don't regret saving us." My son smiled, small but certain, and in that moment, I knew we had crossed a line together. We weren't victims anymore. We weren't even survivors. We were something stronger. People who had seen the worst of family and still chosen ourselves. In the weeks that followed, I noticed the shift everywhere. The phone no longer buzzed with drama. The house felt lighter. Even the little things, meals around the table, laughter drifting down the hallway, the sound of my son's pencil scratching on paper, felt like a kind of victory. My brother had once believed we couldn't live without him, that we needed him no matter the cost. But the truth was clear now. He was the one who couldn't survive without taking from others. And us? We were not only surviving, we were finally living. And as I tucked the stack of restitution checks deeper into the drawer, untouched but undeniable, I realized that revenge hadn't been in the courtroom, or in his arrest, or even in the silence that followed. The real revenge was this: peace, a life he could never steal from us again. Months have passed now, and sometimes I forget to even think about him. The phone stays silent, the mail carries only bills and small victories, and the air in our home is no longer heavy with suspicion. My son is thriving. Back to soccer, practice, laughing too loud with his friends, humming while he does homework. When I catch him smiling, carefree, I realize just how much of his childhood my brother tried to steal. But he didn't succeed. If anything, my son grew stronger, sharper, more certain of what loyalty and love should look like. And me? I learned the hardest, most liberating truth. Family is not defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who shows up, who protects, who respects the bond instead of exploiting it. I no longer wonder if I went too far. I no longer question if I should have forgiven or softened or carried his burdens just one more time, because I know now that forgiveness without change is just permission to be hurt again. I chose differently. I chose us. And in doing so, I taught my son that boundaries are not cruelty. They're survival. That love without respect is nothing more than manipulation. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and not look back. So when people ask me if I regret turning my own brother in, I smile and answer honestly, no, because protecting my child will never be a mistake. My brother thought he could take our money and leave us broken. Instead, he gave me clarity. He gave my son strength, and he gave us a future free of his shadow. That is the justice he never saw coming. Tell me, did I go too far or not far enough? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.